1761 past 1822, and Julianne Julie Wintermeyer Erwin, born 1764 past 1843. Both of Julie's parents were born in Germany. Frederick was the 8th of 14 children. He had 11 brothers and 2 sisters. He was actually the second son of Patrick and Julie to be named Frederick. He had a brother, Frederick Erwin, born 1793, born 1800, and died just before the second Frederick was born. It was a common practice in that time to use the name of a child that had passed away. Frederick moved to Tuscarawas County sometime prior to 10 June 1826, as that was the date he married his 15-year-old Christine Noel, who was born in 1811 and passed in 1873. Her parents, Nicholas Noel, born 1765 and passed in 1829, and Mary Elizabeth Pollock Noel, born 1764, passed 1851, had moved to Tuscarawas County from Pennsylvania sometime between the year 1814 and 1820. Frederick's wife, Christine, was born in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, but her family had lived in York County, Pennsylvania prior to that, so it is very possible that the families knew each other back in York County, Pennsylvania. Nicholas and Mary Elizabeth Noel are buried in the Shanesville First Reformed Cemetery near Frederick and Christine. Frederick and Christine had 4 children, 2 sons, William and George, and 2 daughters, Agnes and Sarah. In 1861, when the Civil War broke out, Frederick heeded the call to join the Union Army. He enlisted in Company G of the 51st Ohio Volunteer Infantry, which was composed of men primarily from the Shanesville in Tuscarawas County and the nearby villages of Berlin and Walnut Creek in Holmes County. Company G was known as the Shanesville Blues. His enlistment date was listed as 19 September 1861. He and the regiment began drilling at Camp Meigs in Dover, which is near the Tuscarawas County Fairgrounds, and departed for the South in early November. Being born in 1800, Frederick was 61 years old, and he was the second oldest man to enlist in the regiment, just 2 years younger than Hiram Mosina, who had also volunteered. The regiment spent about 6 weeks at Camp Wickliffe in LaRue County, Kentucky, which was in January and February of 1862. The weather conditions during that year were harsh, and a significant number of the men who were in that regiment passed away. The 51st OVI were part of the initial occupation of Nashville, Tennessee, arriving on the 25th of February in 1862. The regiment was assigned provost duty, which was the police duty at that time, and remained in this role until July of 1862. Frederick served 8 months in the regiment, receiving his discharge on the 22nd of May in 1862. He was discharged on a surgeon's certificate of disability, which likely was related to his advanced age because he was too old then for military service. Frederick died on 6 June 1872 at the age of 72 years in Tuscarawas County, and is buried in the Shanesville First Reformed Cemetery. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank Junior for filling in. I do want to briefly say your program says Trent Johnson, and Trent Johnson is from College Grove, Tennessee, which is south of Nashville. Trent actually brought our attention to Frederick Erwin. He has a website, if you go on, if you're on, and it's called 51st OBI. He posts every day a blog, and he's been doing that for 20 some years. Very knowledgeable on the unit. He had planned to be here, but because of work commitments could not be here. Actually, last Friday night, he sent me the biography and said, could you get somebody in our group? And Junior graciously offered to read that today. So if you were here, I know somebody's already asked me beforehand, is Trent here? He is not here, but he very much wanted to be here. At this time, we will have the unveiling of the Dr. Noe Webster Yoder, Lieutenant from the Company G of the 51st. Glenn Hamill from the Shanesville Historical Society is going to be giving the biography on Dr. Yoder and his family.
I feel like my speech should probably come with a warning first. I would love to stand up here and tell you a heartwarming story, but this is really a tale of tragedy that no family should ever really have to bear. But I thank you all for joining us today, and for the next few minutes, I invite you to join me in an earlier day, on this 3rd day of June in the year of our Lord, 1882. Recently, our Shanesville community has suffered great loss. So as we gather to dedicate these monuments and honor the memory of those who rest beneath them, let it be a time of healing. Since the tragic fire at Gaylor's Hall just 6 months ago, many of our bones have mended, but yet our hearts are still broken for the loved ones we have lost. Noah Yoder's wife Catherine and their son Milty, along with 8 others in our village, perished in this inferno. It was the greatest disaster, the deadliest disaster our county has ever known. We were all dreaming of a splendid festival as we ushered in 1882 with a banquet on New Year's Eve. However, the small 2nd floor hall could not contain 200 of our village's family and friends. The support beam under the floor tore loose from its anchors. So instead of recalling a night of laughter and music, today we are still haunted by the cries of those who were trapped as the floor collapsed into the storeroom below. A mass of struggling humanity atop the potbelly stove and lamps. Among those was 7-year-old Milty, who died that night cradled in his mother's arms. Catherine tried to save her son, but she could not climb through the debris to find an exit. Her love for Milty meant sacrificing her own life, as a week later she succumbed to her burns and her heartbreak. We cannot begin to imagine the grief of Noah and Catherine's 4 teenage daughters, now orphaned. They could not be here today, as they have been sent off to start new lives in new places with new family members. All this misfortune put upon them just 7 years after their other brother, Lonnie, died of diphtheria. And only 5 years ago, they lost their father, Noah, in the only manner in which Noah knew how to live, being ever faithful in his calling to serve others. Noah was one of 11 children, born to Yost and Nancy Yoder in Berlin. But we came to know him here in Shanesville at an early age, as he came to our select school for teaching here during the summer. In the winters, he would travel to country schools and teach other children. And it was with this dedication and discipline that provided the means for his medical training under Dr. Pomerane. Just months after he and Catherine married, Noah answered his country's call for service and enlisted for 3 years in the Civil War. As 2nd Lieutenant of Company G in the 51st Ohio Volunteer Infantry, he saw action across Kentucky and Tennessee. In the early days of 1863, the 3rd day of the Battle of Stones River, which was the bloodiest battle for both sides during the entire war, Noah faced desperate odds. Whether it was an error in communication or misguided bravado, he had accepted an ill-fated order to lead his regiment to the top of the hill and stand their ground regardless of all consequences. The rebels advanced in solid mass and cut his regiment to pieces. Noah was first struck in the collarbone by a large musket ball, but refused to abandon his command and retreat. Anyone with less medical knowledge would have bled out on the battlefield that day. But Noah stopped his own bleeding, and he survived. His men came and attempted to carry him to safety, but they themselves were shot, until he was left leaning against a tree stump. He was caught in crossfire for the next 9 hours. He was shot 7 more times. One bullet struck him in the bowels, one took off a fingertip, and another shattered his left leg. And still, Noah survived. He went to the military hospital at Louisville. His leg needed to be amputated due to gangrene. He was at death's door more than once, and yet again he survived. After 5 months of treatment at the hospital, Noah himself was treating other patients. He served out his service in the war as a doctor at the Union Hospital until he could return to his own practice here in Berlin. Noah joined our community in 1871 and became a beloved caregiver of many. Although we knew that his own infirmities required a little alcohol to steady his hand, Dr. Yoder was still an accomplished physician. He was known for his bedside manner and would make the children jump when he took a knife and stabbed it through his pant leg into his wooden leg. During the spring rains 5 years ago, Dr. Yoder would not allow the swelling creek at Barrs Mills to keep him from reaching an ailing patient. He and his assistant located the bridge despite it being under floodwaters. But as they crossed, one of the wheels veered off the edge and their carriage was capsized. The water was not so deep that his assistant was able to reach the bank. But 12 years after the final shots of the Civil War rang, Noah Yoder finally became a casualty. It was due to his only having one good arm and leg. He drowned that day and was swept downstream. I leave you with these words from the Reverend Harvey Hostetler. When Noah's untimely and tragic death occurred, there was mourning in every household. Mothers went about their work sobbing, and children wept at the mention of his name. Winter snows may fall and cover his grave, but his memory will remain evergreen in the hearts of those who knew him best. His heroism, patriotic devotion to his country, and the great good he did to his people will be told from generation to generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. I just want to throw a tidbit in there. The house that Dr. Yoder lived in when their family was here in Shanesville, as you go downtown, before you get to the Y, those of you who are familiar, if you look on the left-hand side, there's a house that's facing this way, and we would see the porch on this side. On the front of the house, it says 935. I know for 10 years or so, I lived there, and it was a red brick house, and it's been painted. So that was Dr. Yoder's house. He saw patients in the front room, as was the practice at that time. And the story that I read, he went upstairs to get away from patients so he could take a break and get away from seeing the patients. So that house is still standing. You might look at that later as you go down through there. At this time, I'm going to call on Brian McNamara and his troops, his comrades from the 41st, and they are going to do a dedication ceremony, and we'll turn it over to him at this time.
Good afternoon. I am Captain Brian McNamara of the 41st Volunteer Infantry Reenacting Group. The following service is adapted from the 1917 service for the use of the Grand Army of the Republic. It was used to dedicate headstones for a Civil War veteran. Camp, attention. Parade, rest. Brothers, we have met here to consign to that house prepared for all the living, the memory of soldiers of this country, First Lieutenant Noah Webster Yoder and Private Frederick Erwin. The march of these soldiers is over. Let us remember Comrade Yoder and Erwin here at rest under the blue skies of heaven, guarded by the silent stars that in life